Tycoon storms, his country estate unannounced, and the sight stops his heart. The silence of the Swiss Alps didn't just break. It was murdered by the scream of a high-performance German engine. Chrome and steel thundered against granite cliffs, a violent scar across a landscape that looked less like geography and more Behind the wheel, Adrian Montalvo strangled the black leather grip knuckles bleached white. 45 years old and a man who treated surprises like diseases. He didn't catch them, and he certainly didn't tolerate them. His existence was a flawlessly executed spreadsheet, diversified portfolios in Dubai, skylines in New York, and a history suffocated under layers of concrete and nine-figure bank accounts. But that phone call from the realty firm had lit a fuse in his chest. Unacceptable. He barked at the dashboard blind to the breathtaking emerald valleys blurring past the glass. I pay you a king's ransom to keep that estate barren and market ready. Not to run a shelter for squatters. I'm 2 minutes out. Have a damn good excuse ready. He didn't wait for a reply, hurling the phone onto the passenger seat like a grenade. This wasn't just property. It was the cabin of his childhood, a rotting timber monument to freezing nights and the stench of cheap stew. It had to go, this week. A luxury hotel group was drooling over the land. Selling it was the final surgical cut to sever his humble beginnings for good. Tires shrieked against gravel as the sports car tore into the private driveway. Adrian slammed the brakes, kicking up a choking cloud of dust. The mountain silence rushed back in, but now it felt different. Heavy, crushing like a marble slab. He stepped out, smoothing a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than his father had earned in a lifetime. The alpine air, sharp as a blade, slapped his face, forcing memories of pine resin and damp earth into his lung scents he thought he'd scrubbed away. But his eyes trained to spot microscopic flaws in architectural blueprints locked onto a scene that froze him solid. His jaw went slack, hands suspended in midair, as if physically pushing back a hallucination. There, against the dark timber of the chalet, decked out with window boxes of red geraniums that seemed to bleed color onto the old wood, something was happening that defied every rule in his corporate playbook. No filth, no vandalism, just a holy quiet. On the manicured grass, speckled with yellow and violet wildflowers, a young woman was on her knees. She wore a domestic uniform, crisp blue, with white cuffs that practically glowed in the afternoon sun. Her hands, still sheathed in bright yellow rubber cleaning gloves, were clasped tight in desperate prayer. Her eyes were shut, profile catch lighting in the gold sun radiating a peace Adrian found himself instantly inexplicably jealous of. But it wasn't the woman who made the tycoon's heart hammer a painful rhythm against his ribs. It was who was with her. 3 little boys, triplets, carbon copies of each other, maybe 6 years old, kneeling in a perfect row on the grass. They wore simple blue tees and beige shorts, their knobby little knees sinking right into the soil. The alpine sun turned their messy blonde hair into glowing halos, and their eyes were squeezed shut with gut-wrenching force lids trembling as if their sheer intensity held the cosmos together. Adrian took a step, leather soles crunching loudly on the stones. He opened his mouth to roar to evoke his rights as owner, but a voice fragile and clear as glacial meltwater stole the breath from his throat. It was the boy in the fiddle. "Papa, God!" he whispered, the sound carrying on the wind straight to the millionaire's ears. "Please don't forget what we asked yesterday. Make my daddy's heart find the map back home. Grandma says his soul is lost in the big glass towers, but we know he's still good inside. And please," the brother on the left added without peeking, "don't let Grandma's medicine run dry. She cries when she thinks we're sleeping." "Amen," the third one on the right declared with the solemn weight of a judge. Adrian felt like he'd taken a sledgehammer to the gut. The oxygen vanished from his lungs. He stood paralyzed, hands still raised, brain short-circuiting between rage, confusion, and a cold, ancient dread. Dad, Grandma. Who were these trespassers daring to weaponize prayer on his land, firing darts straight at his conscience? The visual was perfect. The blue uniforms, the yellow gloves, the electric green meadow, the snow-capped peaks. It was cinematic. But to Adrian, standing there in his $5,000 suit, it felt like the cruelest joke of his life. He had arrived to finalize a transaction, not to bear witness to some spiritual display. His corporate instincts, sharpened by years of crushing rivals, kicked in immediately. This had to be a grift, a theatrical performance designed to tug at his heartstrings and lighten his wallet. True innocence is a myth, he thought bitterly. Nobody prays with that kind of fervor unless they want a payout. Straightening his spine, Adrian cleared his throat loudly, shattering the garden's serene atmosphere. "That's enough." The words came out gravelly, sounding foreign even to his own ears. The woman's eyes snapped open. She didn't look scared, just startled for a heartbeat before her expression settled into something heavier, a look Adrian couldn't quite read. The three boys pivoted as one, and when he saw their faces, the earth seemed to drop out from under him. Those eyes, those damned blue eyes, they were his own. They were the exact same eyes that stared back at him from the bathroom mirror every single morning. Slowly, the woman rose, dusting grass blades from her skirt. No bowed head, no apologies. She stood between the tycoon and the boys like a lioness wearing dishwashing gloves. "Welcome, Mr. Montalvo," she said. There was no tremor in her tone. It was soft yet anchored with the kind of strength deep roots use to hold a mountain together against a slide. "You're early." A cold shiver ran down Adrian's spine. She knew exactly who he was. Worse, she wasn't looking at a boss or a landlord. She was looking at a man who was late for his own destiny. The air grew heavy, thick enough to choke on. Adrian stepped forward, breaching their perimeter, using his height to loom over them. Seeing this stranger in a sharp suit close in, the triplets shrank back instinctively, clutching at the woman's legs for safety. "Who are you?" Adrian spat the words, jabbing a finger in her face. "And what the hell are you doing on my land with these kids? I was told this place was vacant." "Vacant. Do you know what that word means?" Slowly, she peeled off the yellow rubber gloves, exposing hands that were raw from labor but still elegant. Her gaze swept over his features, hunting for any remnant of the boy she might have known years ago. Or maybe she was just gauging the depth of his ego. "My name is Lucia," she answered. Her calm demeanor only fueled his rage. He was used to people stammering in his presence. "And we aren't doing anything, Mr. Montalvo. We were praying. In this house, we give thanks before sundown. It's a tradition the owner insists on keeping alive." Adrian barked out a dry, mirthless laugh. "The owner?" he mocked. "I've got the deed right here in my briefcase, sweetheart. I own this land, this rotting lumber, and every single weed you're standing on. And if my realtor let you in, he'll be filing for unemployment by tomorrow morning." He sneered at the boys, forcing himself to overlook the resemblance screaming from their faces. Tomas, Danielle, and Leo stared back, caught between wonder and terror. One of them, the one who had prayed for medicine, crept forward, peeking out from behind Lucia's hip. "Are you the man who came to save Grandma?" the boy asked with devastating innocence. Adrian frowned, thrown off balance. "I'm not here to save anyone, kid. I'm here to sell, to liquidate. And clearly I've got a mess to clean up before the buyers get here." He turned back to Lucia, done with the conversation. "Gather your junk. You have 10 minutes to get off my property. I'm not calling the cops because I don't need a scene scaring off investors, but don't test me. Get out." Lucia didn't flinch. Instead, she squared her shoulders and crossed her arms. The breeze caught the edge of her white apron. "We aren't going anywhere, Adrian," she said, dropping the formalities. Hearing a servant use his given name felt like a physical slap. "How dare you?" He stepped closer, menacingly. "We aren't leaving because we have nowhere else to go," she interrupted, her voice rising just enough to cut him off without screaming. "And because the woman inside, the one who hired me to care for her when everyone else abandoned her, won't survive the move." Adrian ran a hand through his immaculate hair, ruining the perfect style for the first time that day. He was dealing with a lunatic. "What are you talking about? Who's inside? Some distant aunt, some squatter taking advantage of a vacant lot?" Lucia let out a long sigh, heavy with infinite sadness. She glanced at the boys and nodded toward the yard. "Boys, go play by the old oak tree. Take your paper boats. I need a moment with the gentleman." The triplets obeyed instantly, though Leo paused to look back at Adrian one last time before scrambling after his brothers. That gaze pierced right through him, heavy with a disappointment that felt far too old for such young eyes. Once the children were out of earshot, Lucia stepped into his personal space. Her scent, simple soap and lavender, clashed violently with the sharp synthetic tang of his designer cologne. "She isn't a squatter, Adrian," she murmured, her voice barely rising above the wind. "It's your mother, Doña Remedios." Adrian felt the earth grind to a halt beneath his feet. The breeze died down. The birds fell silent. All that remained was the thunderous pounding of his own pulse hammering against his skull. "You're lying." He choked out, all color draining from his face. "My mother is at the Golden Sunset facility in Zurich. I pay 6,000 euros a month for that place. I get the reports every 30 days. She's perfectly fine." "Those reports are automated, Adrian." Lucia snapped, eyes glistening with unshed tears. She broke out of that gilded cage 3 years ago. The isolation was killing her. She couldn't stand being just another patient number to nurses who didn't even know her name. She hitchhiked her way back here. She walked. She came back to the only place she ever knew happiness, with you. Adrian shook his head, stumbling backward. The reality he had meticulously constructed, that fortress built on wealth and denial, began to fracture. That's impossible. They would have notified me. Oh, they called. Lucia pressed her voice relentless. They called plenty of times, but your assistant screens everything, doesn't she? Non-urgent family matters. That's the category, isn't it? A wave of nausea rolled over him. A vague memory surfaced, archived emails, skipped voicemails on a private line he barely ever checked. She's right inside Adrian. Lucia pointed toward the slightly open timber door of the cottage. She's sitting at that same battered oak table where she fed you as a boy, just waiting. She's been waiting 7 years for you to walk through that door. She doesn't want your money. She just wants to see your face one last time before she goes blind forever. He stared into the gloomy interior. The entryway looked like a gaping maw, a portal to a final judgment he was nowhere near ready to face. What about you? Adrian's voice shook, desperate to find someone else to blame for his torment. Where do you fit into this? Just some opportunist taking advantage of a senile old woman, I bet. Lucia gave him a sad smile, one carrying a weight of sorrow Adrian couldn't begin to fathom. I'm the one who changes her diapers when she's too weak to stand. I'm the one who cooks her potatoes exactly the way she likes them. I'm the one reading her your old letters, the ones you wrote when you were 20, back when you actually had a heart. I'm just the help, Adrian. Just the maid. But right now, I'm the only thing standing between your mother and the grave. Lucia stepped aside, clearing the path to the entrance. Go on, she dared him. Walk in there and look her in the eye. Tell her you came here to sell the roof over her head. Tell her your $6,000 a month bought your peace of mind, not her happiness. Do it if there's actually a man left underneath that expensive suit. Adrian stood alone at the threshold, his feet anchored to the ground as if cast in lead. The anger evaporated, leaving behind a cold, visceral dread. It was the terrified feeling of a little boy realizing he's done something unforgivable. He glanced toward the meadow where the 3 kids played silently, then turned his gaze back to the gloom of the cottage. Drawing a deep breath of crisp air into his lungs, he took the first step inside. He walked toward a past he had spent a lifetime running from, unaware that what waited at that old table would alter his destiny forever. Stepping from the brilliant alpine sunlight into the cabin's shadows was jarring, almost blinding him. He had to blink rapidly, forcing his eyes to adjust to the dim hallway. The air hung heavy with the scent of aged timber beeswax and the unmistakable richness of a homemade stew simmering for hours. That scent hit him like a physical blow, dragging him instantly back to a childhood he had spent decades trying to scrub from his memory. His footsteps echoed hollowly against the floorboards. Every groan of the wood felt like an accusation, the house itself protesting the return of the prodigal son who had scorned his roots. The walls, paneled in pine, darkened by the years, were starkly bare, stripped of the expensive art he displayed in his New York penthouse. The only decorations were a hand-carved crucifix and a calendar from 5 years ago, still turned to the month of his last fleeting visit. He moved toward the kitchen, drawn by a soft, rhythmic scraping sound. Scrape, scrape, scrape. At the doorway, he froze. The tableau before him resembled a Baroque painting, lit only by a single shaft of sunlight dancing with dust motes streaming in from the small western window. And there she was, Doña Remedios. She wasn't dead, and she certainly wasn't in the luxury suite overlooking the lake in Zurich that he paid for so religiously. She sat hunched over the heavy oak table, a scarred relic that had anchored their family universe for decades. The very same slab of wood where he'd struggled through math homework wept over his first crushing heartbreak, and swore with cocky, youthful pride that he'd replace it with sleek marble just to escape the sight of that splintered timber. His mother looked diminished, far frailer than the formidable woman in his memory. Time and isolation had whittled her down, bowing her spine as if gravity pulled harder on the lonely. Her hair, once a sharp steel gray, had faded to snow white, gathered in a messy bun with stray wisps escaping. Her gnarled, shaking hands gripped a paring knife, peeling potatoes with a pace so slow it was painful to watch. Long brown spirals of skin drifted down onto a yellowed newspaper spread across the tabletop. A lump formed in Adrian's throat, thick and suffocating, choking off his breath and his words. The leather of his expensive Italian loafers creaked as he shifted, finally alerting the old woman. She froze. She didn't turn, sitting statue still, as if straining to hear the house's resident ghosts. "Lucia, dear," she rasped, her voice dry as autumn leaves. "Are those bank men gone? Don't let them in. Tell them I'm asleep. Tell them my son is coming to fix everything." Adrian felt his heart shatter, the shards instantly melting into a hot, agonizing shame. She still believed in him. Or perhaps her mind had built a sanctuary of lies to survive his neglect. "It's not Lucia, Mom," he finally managed. His voice boomed in the small kitchen, too deep, too polished, too foreign. Remedios dropped the knife with a sharp clatter. She turned slowly, fear etched into eyes clouded by cataracts searching the gloom. She squinted, struggling to resolve the dark silhouette standing in the doorway. "Adrian," she whispered the name, sounding halfway between a prayer and a curse. "Is it you, or is my mind playing tricks again?" Adrian stepped into the light, feeling absurdly overdressed in a €3,000 suit. He approached the table but couldn't bring himself to touch her. "It's me, Mother." Remedios pushed down on the wood with shaking hands, trying to rise, but her legs betrayed her. She collapsed back into the straw chair, exhaling a sigh that carried the weight of infinite relief and sorrow. "You came." She breathed a single tear, cutting a shiny track through the deep canyons of her face. "I knew it. Lucia kept saying you were too busy, too important now, but I told her my Adrian never forgets his roots." "It's at the Sarson, he said. He'll be back before I die." Adrian clenched his hands into tight fists at his sides. Guilt burned through his gut like battery acid, triggering his default setting, cold hard pragmatism. He walled off the pain. "Mother, what are you doing here?" He forced authority into his voice. "I put you in Golden Sunset Estates. You had round-the-clock nursing central heating gourmet meals. You ran away. Do you realize how reckless that is? You could have died out there." Remedios looked up, and for a fleeting second the frailty vanished. Her eyes sparked with the fire of the mountain woman who'd raised a boy on her own. That place smelled like death, son. Nothing but bleach and loneliness. She picked up another potato, clinging to the routine to stay grounded. "Here it smells like life. My memories are here. My children are here." Adrian scanned the kitchen, finally noticing the subtle signs of life he'd missed before. 3 colorful plastic cups drying by the sink, crayon drawings taped to the rusting fridge, wooden blocks kicked into a corner. "Those kids." Adrian trailed off, recalling the faces in the yard that looked hauntingly like his own reflection. "Lucia said she works for you, but Mom, be realistic. This house is a wreck. The heating is ancient. The windows draft. It's not unlivable. I live better here with a wool blanket and company than there with silk sheets and silence." Remedios cut in. Her voice was steel. "Besides, I couldn't let Lucia carry the burden alone. She's an angel, Adrian. An angel you sent to me without realizing it." "I didn't send anyone," he snapped, feeling cornered by the truth. "I didn't even know she existed until today." Remedios gave him a sad, knowing smile and went back to her peeling. "There is much you don't know, my son. Your money gave you the world, but it took your sight. Are you blind, Adrian, blinder than I am?" Adrian's frustration boiled over. He couldn't handle this. He wasn't used to speaking in riddles, and he certainly wasn't used to feeling this small. Adrian was a man who dealt in fixes, and in his world every solution carried a price tag. His hand dipped into his inner coat pocket, retrieving a leather checkbook and a gold fountain pen. The motion was muscle memory, a conditioned reflex to any obstacle. "Look, Mom, I'm not here for a philosophy lecture," Adrian said, flipping the checkbook open on the battered table, sweeping aside potato peels with a sharp shove. "I have buyers arriving in 2 days. This property is sold. The handshake is done. You can't stay here." The scratch of the nib tearing across the paper was shrill and ugly in the silent kitchen. Adrian scrawled a figure loaded with zeros, a sum that would look like a jackpot to the average person. But to him, it was simply overhead. The cost of doing business. He ripped the check free and slid it toward his mother's weathered hands. "Here, take this. It is enough for a small cottage in town, 2 private nurses, and—" He hesitated for a beat. "A payout for that girl. Lucia, pay her to leave and take those kids far away. I don't want lawsuits, just a clean break." Doña Remedios stopped peeling potatoes. She stared at the rectangular slip and its astronomical number. She didn't touch it. She eyed it like a venomous spider that had just crawled onto her table. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to her son. Her eyes were dry, but they held a disappointment so profound Adrian had to look away at the wall. "You think you can buy back lost time with a slip of paper, Adrian?" she asked in a whisper. "You think you can buy the warmth of this kitchen? You think you can pay that girl for the nights she stayed awake, cooling my fever with wet cloths while you were toasting with champagne on the other side of the world? It is money, Mom." Adrian exploded, slamming his open palm on the table. The old wood shuddered but held firm, solid as ever. "It is security. It is what you always wanted, never having to worry about tomorrow. I am doing this for you." You are doing it for your conscience, she corrected gently. But money doesn't heat this house, son. Only the laughter of those children does. And the love of that woman you despise. Take your paper, it won't even start a fire in the stove. Adrian was about to scream to bulldoze her with his will when a thunder of small feet and giggles stormed the house. The back door burst open and the triplets ran in a whirlwind of energy carrying the scent of mountain grass and fresh air. "Grandma, Grandma," yelled Thomas, the first to arrive, completely ignoring Adrian's looming presence. "Look what we found!" The boy slammed a gray, heart-shaped rock right on the table directly on top of the $1 million check. It was caked in dirt, but to the child it was treasure. "It is a mountain heart," Daniel explained, climbing onto the chair beside Remedios and wrapping his arms around her neck. "To make your heart strong so it stops hurting. And Lucia says hot milk is on the way," added Leo, the third one, who stood still staring at Adrian with inquisitive blue eyes identical to the millionaire's. "You are still here, Mr. You staying for dinner." The scene paralyzed Adrian. He watched his mother, who seconds ago seemed like a fragile woman at death's door, light up, her face transformed completely at the touch of the children. She smiled, kissed Daniel's grubby cheek, and handled the stone with a reverence she had never shown the check. "Thank you, my loves. It is beautiful. Exactly what my heart needed." For the first time in his adult life, Adrian felt completely shut out. An intruder in his own home. He witnessed a perfect family unit, the loving grandmother, the devoted grandkids, and he was the foreign element, the cold body rejected by the warmth of the frame. He studied the boys. They were left-handed like him. They had that rebellious cowlick in their bangs like him. And the way Leo looked at him with that mix of defiance and intellect was like looking into a time mirror. A pang of something he couldn't identify, jealousy, fear, longing, pierced his chest. "Who are they, Mom?" Adrian asked, his voice drained of its earlier fury, reduced to a thread of confusion. "Why do they look so much like me?" Before Remedios could answer, Lucia walked in the back door carrying a basket of firewood. She froze when she saw the check on the table and the child's stone weighing it down. She read the room instantly. She dropped the wood to the floor with a dull thud and wiped her hands on her apron. "I think it is time for you boys to wash your hands," Lucia said with maternal authority. "Bathroom, now." The triplets obeyed, albeit reluctantly, throwing sneaky glances at the man in the suit. When the sound of their steps faded down the hall, Lucia turned to Adrian. Her gaze was steel. "Keep your money, Mr. Montalvo," she said, picking up the check and holding it out. "Your money holds no currency in this house. And if you're actually curious about who those boys are, stop checking your bank balance and start checking your memory. The past didn't just vanish 7 years ago because you decided to close your eyes." Adrian snatched the check back, crushing the paper inside his clenched fist. The air in the kitchen grew heavy static, charging the silence. "Sit down," Lucia commanded, pointing to the empty seat opposite his mother. She wasn't asking. "Park it. You've been living a lie for so long you might not be ready for the truth coming your way. And if the shock knocks you out, I'm not scraping you off the floor. Your ego alone makes you too heavy to lift." Before he could argue or comply, a massive boom rattled the timber frame of the cottage. It wasn't a scream or a fist hitting the table. It was the sound of the heavens tearing themselves apart. Thunder echoed off the alpine peaks, chasing a deluge that began hammering against the wooden shingles like 1,000 drumbeats. Daylight vanished from the kitchen window in an instant, swallowed whole by the gloom. A slate-gray twilight took over, the kind of sudden mountain squall that ambushes travelers before they know what hit them. Adrian jerked his phone from his pocket. The screen flared to life, casting a sickly blue pallor over his anxious features. No bars. Either the storm killed the tower, or the mountain finally decided his high-tech gadgets were unwelcome here. "You're not going anywhere tonight," Lucia stated flatly, barely glancing at his useless device. She moved to feed the wood stove. 10 minutes of this downpour turns that access road into a mudslide. That fancy sports car of yours would slide right off the first hairpin turn and straight into the ravine. With a curse, Adrian shoved the phone away and stared outside where a relentless sheet of white rain had erased the rest of the world. Trapped. Stuck in this godforsaken cabin with the mother he walked out on a resentful ex and 3 kids staring at him like he'd just landed from Mars. "Take a seat, Mr. Montalvo," she repeated. Lucia's voice lost its edge, replaced by practicality. "Dinner is served. It isn't the caviar you're used to, but it'll keep you warm." Defeated, Adrian lowered himself onto a wooden chair that groaned in protest. Doña Remedios sat at the head of the table wearing a serene smile that Adrian found utterly unnerving given the circumstances. The triplets scrambled into their spots, Tomas and Daniel directly across from him, while Leo, the quiet watcher, took the chair by his side. Lucia ladled out a thick beef and potato stew into chipped stoneware bowls. The rich aroma of bay leaves, thyme, and slow-roasted meat filled the room, and Adrian's stomach growled loudly, betraying his attempt at aloof superiority. They ate in a suffocating silence, the only sounds being the scrape of metal on clay and the howling gale beyond the walls. Adrian tried to keep his gaze averted, but old habits die hard. His analyst brain, hardwired to spot loopholes in million-dollar deals, began unconsciously tracking data points across the dinner table. First, it was the mechanics of the meal. He watched Tomas lift his spoon, left hand. His eyes darted to Daniel, left hand. Then Leo, right next to him, left hand. All three boys. Adrian's own spoon clattered into his bowl. He was a lefty. In a right-handed world, the statistical odds of 3 random kids sharing that trait were microscopic. Finding 3 of them under this roof wasn't just a coincidence. It was a statistical impossibility that made the hair on his arms stand up. "Is the stew okay?" Leo asked, blinking those massive blue eyes, his spoon hovering midway to his lips. "No, it's fine," Adrian muttered. His Italian silk collar suddenly felt like a noose. He tugged at his tie, desperate for air. That's when the second variable hit him. Leo reached across the table to grab a roll. As he stretched, the sleeve of his shirt rode up his arm. Right there on the inner wrist sat a birthmark, a jagged splash of café au lait pigment shaped like a distorted teardrop. Adrian felt his temperature plummet. His blood turned to ice. Moving like a robot, Adrian unbuttoned his left cuff. He peeled back the expensive white silk and rotated his wrist. Identical. Same shape, same shade. He stared at his own skin, then back at the boy. It was like looking at a miniature clone of himself. He looked up, face drained of all color, locking eyes with Lucia by the stove. She wasn't surprised. She was waiting. Her dark gaze held a cocktail of pity and defiance, watching his ruthless, calculating brain finally catch up to what his gut had known the moment he walked in. "Mother." Adrian choked out, his voice barely a whisper, trembling for the first time in years. "Who are these children?" Doña Remedios set down her spoon, the silence breaking around her. She looked at her son with infinite love. "They are the answer to my prayers, son, and the living consequence of your past." Adrian shot out of his seat, the chair scraping violently against the floorboards with a dull thud. The bread fell from the children's hands, their eyes wide with panic. "Stop speaking in riddles," he roared, unable to contain the pressure seen building in his chest. "They're left-handed. They have my birthmark, my eyes. What exactly is going on here? Kids, go to the back room and read stories with Grandma." Lucia ordered, her voice calm but hard as steel, cutting off Adrian's outburst. Doña Remedios struggled to her feet. Sensing the danger in the room, the 3 children rushed to support her, casting terrified glances at the tall, screaming stranger. As they vanished down the hallway, and the bedroom door clicked shut, leaving Adrian and Lucia alone in the kitchen, a silence fell that was heavier than the storm raging outside. Adrian gripped the edge of the table with both hands, his breathing ragged and shallow. The only light came from the dying embers of the stove and the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated Lucia's stoic face. "Whose are they?" Adrian demanded, though the truth was already tearing his world apart. He just needed to hear the words to let the destruction finish. "Do you really need me to spell it out?" Lucia replied, walking slowly around the table until she stood directly in front of him. "Has the money blinded you so completely that you don't recognize your own blood staring you in the face?" Adrian shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut as if that could block out reality. Fragments of memory began to bombard his mind, images he had deliberately filed away under juvenile distractions. 7 years ago, he rasped, his voice raw. "I was here the last summer before I left for New York, before I built Montalvo Estates." "Yes," Lucia said, taking a step closer. "You were here, and I wasn't alone." Adrian's eyes snapped open, locking onto her. The memory of a young girl, a local waitress at the village inn, superimposed itself over the woman standing before him. She had changed. The laughing girl with braids was gone. In her place was a woman hardened by life, but the features were undeniable. "You," Adrian whispered, the recognition hitting him like a physical blow. "You are Lucia, the girl from the summer festival. The river girl. The girl you promised to write to." She finished, her voice void of bitterness, holding only cold truth. "The girl you spent every night with that August, promising her the world was ours for the taking." "It was one summer, Lucia," Adrian stammered, his survival instincts kicking in. "We were kids. I had plans. I had ambition. I couldn't stay in a lost mountain town raising cattle. I had to leave. And you did? She nodded. You vanished one morning without so much as a goodbye to my face. Just a note left on your mother's nightstand and an envelope of cash. Adrian remembered the note. He had written it with the haste of a man running from his own fate. Do not look for me, Lucia recited from memory, the words slicing through the air. I need to fly light to fly high. A family would be an anchor that would drag me down. Forget me. That's what you wrote, Adrian. The billionaire looked away, a sharp pang of shame piercing his armor. Yes, those had been his words. To his 20-something mind, love and family were nothing but obstacles on the road to success. I didn't know, Adrian stuttered. I didn't know you were pregnant. You didn't know because you never asked, Lucia countered. I found out 2 weeks after you bolted. I went to the house to find you. Your mother was already destroyed by your departure. When I told her I was expecting your child, well, it turned out to be 3. She was the only one who didn't judge me. The town called me the abandoned gold digger. They said I invented the pregnancy to trap the rich boy who got away. But your mother, she took me in. Adrian's tone shifted, oscillating between accusation and pleading. Why didn't you find me? I have offices all over the globe. My name is on magazine covers. You could have found me. You could have told me I had 3 children. I had a right to know. Lucia let out a dry, bitter laugh. A right? You. The man who wrote that, a family was an anchor. Lucia slammed her palm against the table. What would you have done, Adrian, if I had shown up at your glass tower in New York 6 years ago with 3 crying babies? Would you have held me, or would you have pulled out your checkbook just like you did today with your mother to pay for our silence and ship us away? The question hung in the air, toxic and undeniable. Adrian opened his mouth to protest, to claim he would have done the right thing, but the words died in his throat. He knew in the darkest corner of his soul that Lucia was right. The Adrian of 6 years ago, obsessed with, back when he made his first million children, weren't miracles in his eyes, they were liabilities. Walking public relations disasters waiting to happen. I made the choice for their sake. Lucia pressed on her composure, finally, fracturing her voice, trembling. I refused to let them grow up knowing their father viewed them as a regret. An absent father is painful, Adrian, but a cold one is destructive. I chose love over your indifference. Your mother and I had an agreement. That check you cut every month for the nursing home, it went to groceries. It kept a roof over our heads. She bought our survival, and in return I gave her the grandchildren you didn't want. The room spun around him. Every merger, every skyline he'd reshaped suddenly felt as fragile as a house of cards in a gale. He had been bankrolling a secret life while rotting in a gilded cage of his own making. Do they? His voice failed him. Do they know? They know their father is lost, she answered. They know he's a titan who builds empires for strangers but can't find the map to his own front door. They don't pray for your wire transfers, Adrian. They pray you'll stop running, that you'll heal. The strength left his legs and he collapsed into the chair, burying his face in his hands. A searing heat flooded his eyes, tears he hadn't shed since he was 12 years old. I'm a monster, he choked out against his palms. No, Lucia said softly. To his shock, a warm hand settled on his shoulder. The touch sent a jolt through him. You're just a deeply impoverished man with a heavy bank account, but you still have a pulse. The weather has granted you a captive audience for one night. Your money is useless here, you can't buy back yesterday. The past is dead, but the future that's still on the table provided you're willing to pay in a currency other than cash. Adrian looked up, his bloodshot eyes locking with the woman who had spun dignity out of destitution. Tell me what to do, he pleaded, stripped of all arrogance. For starters, Lucia said, pulling back and pointing a finger toward the mountain of grease-stained plates. The rule here is simple: if you didn't cook, you scrub. After that, go watch your children sleep and see if you have the stomach to evict them in the morning. Adrian stared at the sink as if it were a hostile takeover target. Menial labor was beneath a CEO, yet this felt like the most critical negotiation of his career. He shed his Italian blazer, draped it over the chair, and fumbled with the solid gold cufflinks at his wrists. The thunder rattled the windows, but the real hurricane was tearing through Adrian Montalvo's chest. Icy water blasted from the tap, numbing his skin, but the physical sensation didn't register. His mind was miles away, locked in a spiral. He was drowning in a vortex of moral bankruptcy and jagged truths that sliced through his ego. Here stood the titan who had closed a $50 million merger with Tokyo last week, without blinking, now battling stubborn grease on chipped ceramic with a dying sponge. The sheer absurdity of the moment made him pray this was just a stress-induced hallucination that he'd snap awake in his penthouse wrapped in Egyptian cotton. Yet the stinging scent of lemon detergent and the relentless drumming of the rain were brutally real. He rinsed the final dish, setting it down with the precision of a bomb disposal unit, terrified that a single clatter might shatter the delicate piece holding the room together. Drying his hands on a towel he froze, he recognized his mother's cross-stitch work. He stood there in the dim light, utterly adrift. Stripped of his smartphone, his luxury sedan, and his army of yes men, Adrian realized he had no idea who was staring back from the reflection. For years his net worth was his identity. Without it, he was a ghost. "They're out cold." A soft voice drifted from the hallway. He jumped. Lucia leaned against the doorframe, her body sagging with exhaustion. Yet her gaze remained sharp, assessing him like a warden watching a flight risk. "How is she?" he asked, unable to meet her eyes, terrified of the verdict he'd find there. The shock drained her. Her heart isn't built for this kind of drama anymore. Tread carefully tomorrow, Adrian. If you're planning to liquidate this place, make it quick. Don't drag it out. Hope is a cruel thing to give if you don't mean it. His jaw clenched. The label stung. "I'm not the Grim Reaper, Lucia. I'm a businessman. I have boards to answer to leverage ratios binding agreements. It's not as simple as deciding to play happy family." "Nobody asked for your presence," she shot back, her voice dropping to 0 degrees. "We just asked for mercy." "But I get it. Your empire down in the city takes precedence." She turned to leave, pausing only to gesture vaguely behind her. "You can take the couch." "You'll find extra blankets in the trunk. It's miles from a king-sized mattress, but it beats sleeping on the floorboards. Good night, Mr. Montalvo." As her silhouette vanished into the hallway shadows, a crushing solitude descended on Adrian, heavy as lead. He wandered back into the living area. The fire was dying out, leaving only fading embers that stared back at him like glowing red eyes from the gloom. He sank into the worn green velvet couch, the very spot where his father used to take his Sunday afternoon naps. That jagged spring on the left side was still there, digging into his ribs. Adrian tried to settle in, but sleep was a stranger. Insomnia, however, was his oldest friend. Outside, the storm raged, rattling the window panes in their frames. Restless, he abandoned the couch and began pacing the floor. Once his vision adjusted to the half-light, his gaze drifted across the bookshelves. There were no framed accolades, no newspaper clippings boasting of his corporate conquests. Instead, the shelves told a different story, snapshots of 3 boys growing up. The triplets taking wobbly first steps, covered in mud, blowing out candles on a lopsided homemade cake. Then, tucked away in a corner behind a vase, he spotted a small, faded photograph. He picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. It was him, 18 years old. He was smiling with a kind of innocence. He no longer possessed his arm draped affectionately around his mother's shoulders. They both looked so happy, even in their mended clothes. "When did you lose that kid?" he whispered into the silence. The guilt he'd kept locked away behind walls of cynicism began to seep through the cracks in his armor. His thoughts turned to the boys, his left-handed sons bearing his mark. There were 3 versions of himself sleeping in the next room, 3 chances to rewrite a story he thought had already ended. Driven by an impulse he couldn't suppress, he moved toward the bedroom door and gently eased it open. The hinges were silent, likely Lucia's doing. A sudden flash of lightning briefly flooded the room with stark white light. He saw the 3 small beds lined up neatly against the far wall. The boys were in a deep slumber, possessing that total peace only children know. One of them, Leo, had an arm dangling off the mattress, his fingers grazing the floorboards. Adrian felt an irrational urge to go in and tuck him in, but he froze at the threshold. He didn't feel like he had the right. He was a stranger here, nothing more than a genetic intruder. His gaze shifted to the larger bed in the opposite corner. His mother lay on her back. Her breathing came in a rough, labored wheeze. Beneath those heavy wool blankets, she looked fragile, like a wounded bird. "Tomorrow," Adrian thought, trying to rationalize the rising panic in his chest. "Tomorrow, once this storm breaks, I'll fly in the best heart specialist from Zurich. I'll buy the house next door if I have to. I'll give them money, serious money. I'll set up trust funds for the boys. Lucia will never have to work another day in her life. Yes, that's the answer. Cash fixes everything. I just need to handle the logistics." He clung to that thought like a lifeline. Turning emotional crises into financial transactions was his specialty. It gave him control. It allowed him to numb the pain. He returned to the couch, convinced he had a solid plan. He lay down, determined to wait for sunrise so he could execute his strategy of financial redemption. He closed his eyes against the howling wind, telling himself he wasn't a bad man, just a practical one. But the mountain had other plans, and God, or perhaps fate, was about to teach Adrian Montalvo that his checkbook held absolutely no power over the raw forces of life and death. Adrian didn't wake up slowly. He was jolted awake as if by an electric shock, a sharp thudding noise followed by a stifled scream. It pierced the silence of the house around 3 in the morning. Adrian sprang from the couch, his heart hammering in his throat. The darkness was nearly absolute, broken only by the strobe light flashes of the storm still battering the world outside. He could hear a voice. It was his mother, but it wasn't the soft, steady tone from dinner. It was a desperate gurgling noise, the sound of someone suffocating. It made Adrian's blood run cold. He sprinted toward the bedroom, smashing his shin against a chair in the blackness, but he didn't slow down. By the time he reached the doorway, Lucia was already there, lighting a candle. The power was completely out. The flickering candlelight revealed a nightmare. Doña Remedios was on the floor, half collapsed from the bed, one hand clutching her chest while the other clawed desperately at the sheets. Her face was ashen and drenched in cold sweat, her lips turning a terrifying shade of blue. She was gasping for air like a fish thrown onto the shore, her eyes bulging with the primal panic of suffocation. The triplets were awake. They sat huddled together on their beds, crying silently, paralyzed by the sight of their grandmother in distress. "Mom!" Adrian shouted, diving to the floor beside her. He tried to lift her, but she was dead weight, heavy as stone. "Mom, please breathe. It's me. It's Adrian." "Don't lay her flat." Lucia's voice cracked like a whip, cutting through his panic. "If you lay her down, she'll drown in her own fluids. Get her upright, now. Prop her back with pillows," she commanded. Adrian didn't hesitate. His usual swagger vanished, replaced by raw panic. He snatched the pillows from the bed, his hands shaking yet powerful as he hoisted his mother up, cradling her against his chest. He could feel her heart hammering wild and uneven through the thin fabric of his silk shirt. "Call an ambulance!" Adrian roared at Lucia, momentarily forgetting where they were. "Get the private hospital on the line. Tell them it's Adrian Montalvo. Tell them to scramble the chopper. I don't care what it costs, I'll pay double." Lucia was tearing through the dresser drawers in a frantic hunt for medication. She whipped around to face him, her eyes blazing with a mix of fury and despair. "There's no signal, you idiot!" she screamed, the line between master and servant finally snapping. "And even if there was no pilot is flying in this gale, we are on our own. Your money is worthless out here. Your name means nothing here." Her words hit him like a sledgehammer. It was the truth. The most terrifying, absolute truth he had ever faced. He could buy the entire hospital chain, but he couldn't buy a single breath for his mother in the middle of this storm. His power was smoke. Here inside this wooden cabin, he was just as fragile as any other man. "So what do we do?" Adrian asked, his voice cracking into a sob of pure helplessness. "She's dying, Lucia. She's dying right in my arms." Lucia finally found a small glass vial and an old syringe. "Emergency stash, digoxin, and a diuretic. But we ran out last week and the snow blocked the pharmacy delivery. There's barely anything left in the bottom." She moved closer, her hands steady despite the fear gripping her. She drew up the remaining liquid. It was a pathetic, almost laughable dose. "Hold her head steady," Lucia ordered. Adrian cupped his mother's face with infinite gentleness. Remedios looked up at him. Her eyes were glassy, fixed on something 1,000 miles away. "Audrey? She wheezed, fighting for air. "Don't go." "I'm not going anywhere, Mom. I'm right here. I'm right here." He wept, pressing his forehead against hers, his tears mingling with the cold sweat on her skin. "Forgive me, Mom. Please don't die now that I'm finally back. Please." Lucia slid the needle into Remedios' thin arm. She checked the pulse at her wrist. "It's too weak," Lucia said, her voice trembling. "The medicine will help, but she needs heat. She's going into shock. Her limbs are freezing. We have to get her body temperature up or her heart is going to stop." Adrian looked around wildly. The fireplace was too far away. The room was an icebox. "Blankets," he yelled. "Get every blanket we have." "It's not enough," Lucia cut in. "She needs body heat. Direct contact." Then something happened that would stay with Adrian for the rest of his life. The 3 children who had been watching in terror sprang from their beds as if commanded by a silent signal. Without a word, they rushed to where Adrian held their grandmother on the floor. "We'll warm her up." Tomas said, his voice firm. "We're little furnaces. Grandma always says so," Daniel added, sniffing back tears. Before Adrian could stop them, the 3 boys huddled tight around Doña Remedios and him. One wrapped himself around the old woman's icy legs. Another pressed against her left side, and Leo. Little Leo wedged himself between Adrian's arms and his grandmother's chest, hugging her right over her heart. "Don't go, Grandma," the boy whispered against her chest. "Dad is here now. We're all together. You can't leave, okay?" Adrian found himself at the center of a human embrace, surrounded by the sons he had just met, holding the mother he had abandoned. He felt the warmth of their small bodies, the vibrant energy of his own bloodline fighting back the cold death stalking Remedios. Lucia returned with the blankets and draped them over the group, creating a makeshift tent of life. She knelt beside them, took Remedios's free hand, and began to pray aloud, a rhythmic, soft litany, battling the sound of the thunder outside. "Our Father, who art in heaven." Adrian, the atheist, the pragmatist, the man of science and ledgers, closed his eyes. He felt his mother's chest rise and fall erratically. He felt Leo's heart beating against his own. And then Adrian prayed, not with memorized verses, but with a silent, gut-wrenching scream from his soul. "If you exist, if you're really up there listening to the poor like they say, listen to me now. Take it all. Take my money, my buildings, my reputation. Make me a pauper tomorrow if you want. Just let her live. Give me the chance to show her I love her. Let me be a father to these boys. Don't punish me by taking her today. I'll trade everything I have for her life. Everything." The world seemed to freeze. Minutes stretched into hours. Adrian didn't move a muscle. He sat rigid, a monument to grief and desperate hope, channeling every ounce of his own warmth into his mother's brittle frame, while his sons clung to him like the lifeline he had failed to be for so long. Outside, the tempest screamed its crescendo, battering the walls as if determined to level the old house to the ground. Yet, beneath that fortress of quilts, Adrian Montalvo was fighting the only war that actually mattered. For once, he wasn't on the front lines alone. In that room, time dissolved, losing all linear shape. Seconds dragged out into hours. Hours pressed down with the weight of decades. Buried under scratchy wool and heavy down the air, grew thick and sweltering heavy with a raw, forced closeness that was completely alien to him. The man accustomed to solitary nights on king-sized mattresses and chilled silk now found himself crushed into a sweating human tangle, his muscles seizing up as he held his body rigid to shield his mother. Not a soul stirred. The triplets, utterly spent from the tears and stress, had crashed into a deep, rhythmic slumber, still stuck to their grandmother's side like barnacles on a reef. Adrian felt the rise and fall of Leo against his right ribs, a tiny bellows of life that, strangely enough, had synchronized perfectly with his own breath. The blackness in the room was nearly total. Lucia's candle had long since guttered out, leaving behind the sharp tang of burnt wax and the faint slate-gray glow of a storm that was finally losing its teeth but still choked the moonlight. "She's still breathing," Adrian whispered into the gloom, his voice nothing more than a raspy thread. He was terrified to shift his hand to check, dreading the sensation of cold flesh. "Yes." Lucia's voice drifted from the darkness mere inches from his face. She hadn't slept. She was keeping watch with the intensity of a mother wolf. Her pulses slow, but it's steady. The warmth saved her Adrian. Theirs and yours. A shuddering sigh escaped him as he tipped his head back, resting it against the hard wooden headboard. "I didn't pray for her salvation." He confessed to the shadows words he would never dare speak in the daylight. "I prayed for a deal. I tried to buy God off Lucia. I put my entire fortune on the table just to buy a little more time. Pathetic, isn't it? Even here I can't stop thinking like a banker." Silence filled the room, broken only by the wind whistling through the drafty window frames. Then he felt Lucia's hand fumbling for his in the dark, her fingers, rough and calloused from work, wrapped firmly around his soft, manicured palm. "It's not pathetic," she murmured. "It's human, and I don't think God cashes checks, but he definitely accepts intentions. For the first time in 7 years, your motive wasn't selfish. It was for her." Her touch sent a jolt through him. It wasn't romantic. It was something far more primal, a bond forged in the trenches between two soldiers who had just survived an artillery barrage. He squeezed back, anchoring himself to that sliver of reality. "Tell me about them," Adrian whispered, nodding vaguely toward the sleeping shapes of the boys. If my mother doesn't make it, I need to know. I need to know what I missed." Lucia let out a long breath. It was the sound of resignation and the beginning of peace. "Tomas, the one clinging to your mother's legs. He's the oldest by 2 minutes. He's the guardian. If he spots an ant on the sidewalk, he forces everyone to detour around it just to keep it safe. He wants to be a doctor so he can fix the world's scraped knees." Adrian swallowed hard, fighting the lump forming in his throat. "Daniel, the middle one, he's the artist. He draws on everything walls, tablecloths, his own skin. He sees technicolor where the rest of us just see gray. He's the sensitive soul. He weeps over wilted flowers. "And him?" Adrian asked, looking down at Leo, who was curled up against his chest. Lucia offered a soft, melancholic chuckle. Leo is you, Adrian. He's stubborn, brilliant. He dismantles his toys to reverse engineer them, then tries to sell the parts back to his brothers. But he still has something you lost a long time ago. He has unshakable faith. He's the one who demanded we pray in the garden when he heard your mother say that Dad was lost. He never believed you were a villain. He just thought you couldn't find your way home. The tears Adrian had managed to bottle up during the adrenaline of the crisis finally broke the dam, spilling hot and silent down his face, disappearing into the collar of his ruined dress shirt. "They don't know me," he whispered, the words laced with agony. "They're holding on to me to save their grandmother, but they have no idea that the man they're hugging is the reason she's sick. I'm the reason you're in this rotting house. I'm the reason your hands are destroyed from manual labor." "They know," Lucia countered. "Children see the soul, Adrian, not the expensive suit." Tonight, they saw a terrified man who loved his mother. That's enough for a start. The real question is, what will they see when the sun comes up tomorrow? Will they see the father who kept them warm through the storm, or the tycoon who came here to evict them? Adrian said nothing. He couldn't. He was being torn apart by two different versions of himself. One part of him, the version built in New York boardrooms, screamed that this was emotional suicide, telling him to evacuate the asset, sign the check, and retreat to his orderly life. But the other part, the one feeling the rhythm of Leo's heartbeat against his ribs, knew the truth. If he walked out that door now, he would be the poorest man on earth, no matter how many billions sat in his accounts. The night dragged on a slow-motion agony. Adrian refused to sleep. He stood sentry over every breath his mother took, every shift of his children etching into his memory. The weight of being needed, of finally being a physical anchor for his family. His legs went dead, and his spine screamed in protest against the unforgiving floor, yet he remained stone still. He wore the pain like a badge of atonement. Around 5 in the morning, Doña Remedios's fever finally broke. Adrian felt the cold, clammy sweat give way to a healthy, natural warmth. Her breathing shifted, becoming deeper, quieter. "Thank you," Adrian whispered to the dark rafters of the cabin. "Thank you." Outside, the storm exhaled its last breath and died. A profound silence draped over the snow-capped mountain, wrapping the house in stillness, and in that void, Adrian Montalvo, the ruthless real estate shark, withered away, leaving space for something new to take root, something fragile and terrified but undeniably alive. Dawn in the Swiss Alps doesn't ask for permission. It arrives with a grandeur that brings human arrogance to its knees. The first rays of sun, liquid gold, sliced through the wooden shutters, cutting the gloom of the bedroom like blades of light. Adrian opened his eyes, though they had never truly closed. The beams revealed the beautiful wreckage of the night, scattered blankets, pillows strewn about, and the tangle of bodies sleeping on the floor. Leo was the first to stir. The boy woke up, rubbed his eyes with clenched fists, and looked up at the ceiling. His gaze locked directly with Adrian's. A flicker of confusion crossed those blue eyes, quickly replaced by a sleepy, trusting smile. "Hi, Dad," he said as casually as if they had shared breakfast every morning for a decade. That simple greeting, spoken without pretense in the raw morning light, crumbled Adrian's last fortification. "Hi, Leo," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. Slowly, the makeshift camp began to untangle. Lucia woke with a start, her hand flying to check on Doña Remedios. The old woman's eyelids fluttered open. She was weak, incredibly pale, but the spark of life had returned to her eyes. She was back. "I had the strangest dream," Remedios whispered, her voice barely a thread. "I dreamed the house froze over, but you were a furnace, my son. You gave me your warmth." Adrian kissed her forehead, brushing away a stray lock of white hair. "It wasn't a dream, Mom." Just as peace settled in the world, intruded. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The unmistakable percussion of rotor blades clawing at the air echoed off the valley walls. The rhythmic thumping swelled rapidly into a sato-shatis, deafening roar that rattled the window panes. Reality had come to collect. Adrian stiffened, checking his wrist. 8 o'clock sharp, Swiss precision. "What is that?" Thomas asked, shrinking back and covering his ears. Adrian rose to his feet. His legs were seized up. His €3,000 suit was a wrinkled disaster of sweat and grime. Dark circles bruised his eyes and heavy stubble covered his face. He looked more like a castaway than a CEO. "The buyers?" Adrian set his tone flat. Or rather, their lawyers. They're here to close the deal. The road must still be blocked. So they flew in. Lucia stood up, positioning herself between the bed and the door, a human shield guarding Remedios. Her expression shifted from the gratitude of the night to a cold, hard dread. "What are you going to do?" she asked. It wasn't a plea. It was a demand for a verdict. Adrian looked at Lucia, then at his mother, who watched him with the painful wisdom of someone expecting the final blow, and finally at his 3 children, eyeing their newfound father with uncertainty. "I'm going out there," Adrian stated. Without another word, he walked out of the bedroom, down the hall, past the kitchen table where the crumpled check lay next to the heart-shaped stone, and threw open the front door. The rotor wash from the helicopter, landing in the meadow, slammed into him, whipping his hair into further disarray. The machine, a sleek black scar against the landscape, settled its skids on the vibrant green grass, crushing the very wildflowers where his children had prayed the day before. The cabin door slid open, and a man of immaculate grooming stepped out. It was Hans, his attorney and right hand in Europe. Dressed in a flawless gray suit with a leather attaché case, he wore a smile of professional triumph. 2 more men followed him out, representatives from the hotel consortium. Hans jogged toward Adrian, ducking instinctively under the slowing blades. "Mr. Montalvo!" he shouted, extending a hand. "Good God, look at you! We were frantic when we lost your signal. We feared the worst, sir, a crash perhaps. But I see the asset is still standing. I have the closing documents. The backers are getting twitchy. They want the bulldozers rolling by next week to maximize the summer weather window. They need to break ground on the resort before the frost sets in." Hans rattled off the logistics with the cold efficiency of a ledger sheet, thrusting a navy leather binder toward Adrian. "Just a signature here, and here. The chopper gets us to Zurich in 20 minutes. You have a board meeting at 3 o'clock sharp." "Shut your mouth, Hans." Adrian didn't raise his voice. It was a low rumble calm, but laced with such absolute command that the lawyer's jaw snapped shut. The money men stepped forward, sneering at the weathered timber shack before turning their noses up at Adrian's mud-stained rags. "Mr. Montalvo," one clipped his English thick with a heavy German accent. "I trust we have no issues. We have a preliminary agreement, and our time is not cheap." Adrian just stared at the folder in Hans's grip. It was a golden ticket back to his old existence. One scribble and this entire messy reality would vanish like smoke. He could put his mother in a 5-star clinic, wire cash to the kids, and retreat to the sterile silence of his penthouse. It was the logical exit strategy, the easy way out. He took the folder. Hans exhaled a relieved breath and offered a Mont Blanc pen. Adrian flipped it open. The first line screamed at him, "Agreement for sale and demolition of rural asset." That single word burned into his retinas. Demolition? Smashing the kitchen where they peeled potatoes, crushing the living room that held the photo of his 18-year-old smile, bulldozing the very floorboards where his children had knelt and prayed for his return. "Hans," Adrian murmured, eyes glued to the page. "Do you know what is actually inside this house?" "Rotting wood and termites, sir," the lawyer quipped, trying to force a laugh. Adrian looked up, his gaze burning with cold fire. "No, my mother is in there. My children are in there." Hans blinked, processing the glitch. "Your children, sir. Your file says you have no dependents." Adrian slammed the folder shut. "That's what I thought, too. Turns out I'm the wealthiest man on the planet, and I didn't even know it." With deliberate slowness, Adrian gripped the contract. The heavy cardstock resisted for a split second before surrendering with a sharp, satisfying tear. Hans gasped as if physically struck. The investors recoiled in horror. Adrian shredded the pieces again and again, reducing the multi-million-dollar deal to nothing but expensive confetti. He opened his palm, letting the mountain breeze snatch the scraps, scattering them across the meadow like dirty snow. "Mr. Montalvo!" Hans shrieked, nearing a nervous breakdown. "This is a flagrant breach of contract. The penalties, the termination clauses, you'll wipe out the quarter's liquidity. You are torching your reputation." Adrian stepped into Hans's personal space. Despite the grime and the rags, he had never looked more like a king. "I don't give a damn about the liquidity, Hans. Pay the fines, sell the New York penthouse, sell the yacht, I don't care. But what do I tell the board?" the pale lawyer stammered. Adrian turned to the cabin. Pressed against the glass were 4 faces watching the showdown. An old woman, a young mother, and 3 identical boys. A smile broke across Adrian's face, a genuine one that finally reached his eyes. "Tell them the property is off the market. Tell them the owner has come home. And tell them to get their damn chopper off my land." He turned his back on the millions, the status, and the empire he'd built over 7 years, walking straight toward the battered wooden door. Lucia was waiting in the hallway, her eyes swimming with tears. "What have you done?" she whispered, though she already knew. Adrian shrugged, feeling a massive weight lift from his soul. "Just taking out the trash, Lucia. Now, is there any of that stew left from yesterday? I'm starving, and I suspect I need to learn how to change diapers even if I am 6 years late to the party." The triplets came charging down the hall, tackling his legs in a synchronized hug. Adrian dropped to his knees to meet them. For the first time, their embrace wasn't born of desperation, but of welcome. The storm had broken, but the real transformation was just beginning. The drone of the helicopter faded into the distance, swallowed whole by the immensity of the snowy peaks, returning the mountain to its sacred silence. But for Adrian, the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a new resonance, vibrant, alive, and honestly a little terrifying. He stood in the meadow a moment longer, staring at the crushed grass where the landing gear had rested, scars left by a metal beast that had tried to eat his home. He took a deep breath. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth and pine needles. It was the scent of freedom, but also the scent of hard work ahead. He turned back to the house. Inside, the hallway was empty. He heard Lucia in the kitchen, the clinking of silverware signaling that life was moving forward. Adrian paused at the entryway, catching his own reflection in the dusty mirror. His designer suit, a multi-thousand-euro shield against the world, was a complete wreck. Mud caked the hems, sweat stained the shirt, and the fabric was crushed like discarded parchment. For the first time, the man beneath the silk looked exhausted but genuine. He climbed the groaning wooden stairs to his old bedroom, a space he had not entered in 7 years. He yanked the wardrobe open, and the sharp scent of mothballs hit him instantly. Inside, folded and hung with obsessive care, likely his mother's doing or Lucia's, rested his past. No labels here. Just worn-out denim plaid flannel shirts and thick hand-knit wool sweaters. He stripped off the suit with frantic energy, letting it pool on the floor like shed skin he needed to escape. He pulled on a pair of vintage jeans that felt a little too snug around the waist now. Years of business dinners had left their mark. He threw on a red plaid shirt and rolled the sleeves up past his elbows. He laced up his old hiking boots, the soles still caked with dried mud from a decade ago, and bypassed the kitchen to head straight for the tool shed. He needed manual labor. He needed his body to ache just enough to silence the noise in his head. He grabbed a rusted toolbox, a handful of nails, a hammer, and a stack of fresh lumber piled in the corner. He stepped out into the yard. The white picket fence marking the property line was collapsing in sections, crushed by heavy snows and years of neglect. It was an open wound on the estate, a monument to his absence. Adrian dropped his knees into the mud, ignoring the stains on his denim. He started prying out rusted nails. His hands, softened by years of signing contracts and typing, protested the rough work immediately. By the third swing, he smashed his thumb. He grunted, shoving the throbbing digit into his mouth and tasting the copper tang of blood. "Keep holding the hammer like that, and you'll break your hand before you fix the fence." Adrian looked up. Lucia stood a few yards away, balancing a tray with 2 lemonades and a plate of sandwiches. She had ditched the uniform for a simple floral dress and a wool cardigan. Without the maid disguise, her beauty hit him like a physical blow. She set the tray on a flat rock and walked over, taking his hand without asking to examine the damage. "You're out of practice," she said, her voice devoid of mockery, offering only quiet truth. "I've lost a lot more than that, Lucia," Adrian replied, letting her touch soothe him. "I lost the right to be here. I'm just trying to earn it back one nail at a time." She met his gaze. The morning sun caught her dark eyes, revealing flecks of gold within. "It's not about rights, Adrian. It's about presence. Money writes checks. Love drives nails." She released his hand gently. "But you don't have it to do it alone." Just then, the house door burst open and the triplets tumbled out, dying to see the master of the house down in the dirt. They stopped at a safe distance, eyeing the hammer and the wood with wide eyes. Adrian wiped the sweat from his brow with his forearm. He looked at his children. "Hey!" He called out, his voice thick with emotion. "I need an engineering crew over here. Someone needs to hold the nails, and I need eyes to tell me if this board is straight. Who's in?" The 3 exchanged glances. Leo, ever the brave one, stepped up first. "I'll hold the nails," he said, crouching beside his father. "I'll check the alignment," Daniel announced, squinting like an artist critiquing a canvas. "And I'll bring you water when you're thirsty," Tomas offered, true to his nurturing nature. Over the next few hours, the vibe in the Alpine garden shifted completely. The millionaire and the strangers vanished. In their place were a father and his sons working under the sun. Adrian showed them how to sand the wood smooth to prevent splinters. He taught them the rhythm of the hammer, and in return they taught him things he had long forgotten. How to laugh when a nail bends, how to marvel at an earthworm wriggling from the damp soil, and how to work without watching the clock. By noon, with the fence half repaired and his body aching, Adrian collapsed onto the grass, breathing hard. His hands were blistered and his back was on fire, yet he felt a strange, soaring euphoria. Lucia sat beside him, handing him a glass of cold lemonade. The boys ran laps around the new fencing, testing its strength. "Adrian," Lucia said, eyes fixed on the horizon, "I need to ask you something. And I need the truth, not the CEO's truth, but the truth from the man currently bleeding from his thumb." Adrian took a long sip and nodded. "Tell me, why did you stay? Hans said you'd lose millions. I heard the screaming. You tore your whole world apart, reduced it to scraps of paper. Why was it guilt? Pity?" Adrian set his drink down on the floorboards. He watched Leo nearby. The boy was shadowing his every move, strutting with hands deep in his pockets, a perfect little mirror of his father. No, Lucia, pity had nothing to do with it. He turned, searching for her gaze. It was jealousy. Lucia's eyebrow arched in pure disbelief. "Jealousy, absolute jealousy of you, watching how you started with empty hands. You were a kid, merchant, and built a kingdom that actually matters. You command those boys respect, you have my mother's love, and you have peace the moment your head hits the pillow. I have bank balances I couldn't drain in 2 lifetimes. Yet last night, while that storm raged, I realized I was the poorest man standing in this room. I stayed because I want real wealth, Lucia, the kind you have." Adrian drew a deep breath, bracing himself for the hardest confession. "And I need your forgiveness, not about the money, but for treating you like hired help in the home of my own children, for forcing you into that uniform, for failing to see the queen holding up my castle while the king was off playing God." Lucia felt a sudden heat rise behind her eyes as tears welled up. She had anticipated an apology, sure, but she never expected such a profound validation of her worth. "The uniform was just fabric, Adrian," she managed, her voice trembling. "It was the distance that cut deep, but that fence you're repairing, it's coming along. It looks strong." Adrian smiled, and for the first time in years, the warmth reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made him look 10 years younger and finally alive. "So, do I get the gig? I have 0 prior experience as a father, and my references are abysmal, but I'm a quick study and I work cheap." Lucia let out a laugh, a clear, resonant sound that made the triplets freeze in their tracks to stare. "You are on probation, Montalvo. Indefinite probation. And the boss around here is extremely demanding," she said, nodding toward Leo. Adrian glanced at his son, then at Lucia, and finally at the cottage where his mother was resting safely. "I accept the terms," he said, extending a hand that was grimy and starting to show the first signs of hard labor. Lucia ignored the hand. Instead, she leaned in and kissed his cheek right over a smudge of grease. "Welcome home, Dad," she whispered. 1 year later, summer returned to the Alps, but the house no longer looked like a monument to loneliness waiting for a wrecking ball. The chalet's weathered timber had been treated and varnished, gleaming a rich honey gold under the intense sun. The roof was fully restored with discrete solar panels lining the southern slope, a modern upgrade. Adrian installed himself to ensure the lights never went out in a storm again. Yet the most dramatic transformation wasn't in the architecture, but in the soul of the property. The garden had erupted into a symphony of color. Window boxes overflowed with red geraniums now vying for attention against Rose's lavender, and a lush backyard patch teeming with massive tomatoes and zucchini. On the porch, nestled in a brand-new rocking chair with plush cushions, sat Doña Remedios. She was 71, yet she looked 10 years younger than she had on the day of the storm. Her cheeks were flushed with health, her eyes sparkled with mischief, and her hands, though still knobby, moved with surprising agility as she knit a blue scarf. "Faster, Dad, faster!" The enthusiastic shout shattered the afternoon calm. A small bicycle zoomed down the gravel driveway. Leo was pedaling furiously, training wheels gone, his face glowing with the sheer thrill of speed. Chasing behind him, panting and laughing, was Adrian. But this wasn't the Adrian of the blue business suits. He wore khaki shorts, a white t-shirt smeared with grass stains, and a pair of beat-up sneakers. His hair was longer now, tousled by the wind, and his skin held the deep tan of a man who worked under the sun, not under the hum of office fluorescents. "Ease up on the curve." Leo hit the back brake. Adrian shouted through his laughter, scrambling to catch up. Tomas and Daniel followed close behind on their own bikes, forming a loud, joyous peloton. "Watch out for Mom's hydrangeas." Doña Remedios warned from the porch needles still clicking, a smile stretching ear to ear. Adrian managed to snag Leo just seconds before he plowed into the flower bed. He grabbed the handlebars and they skidded across the gravel together, kicking up a cloud of dust amidst the laughter. Adrian scooped his son up, spinning him around in the air. "Tour de France champion!" Adrian cheered, planting a kiss on the boy's sweaty cheek. "But you almost took out the bees, kiddo. You've got to respect the air traffic." Lucia stepped out of the house just then, carrying a large pitcher of iced tea. The uniform was gone. She wore jeans and a breezy blouse, her hair loose and cascading in waves over her shoulders. She radiated a quiet, joyful authority. She was the lady of the manor in every sense that truly mattered. "Pit stop for the bike squad," she called out, setting the pitcher down on the garden furniture. The whole family swarmed around the center of the patio. It was that battered old oak table hauled out into the sunlight so they could soak up the afternoon. Adrian settled into a chair with Leo perched on his knee, taking the glass Lucia handed him. When their fingers brushed, he held on just a beat too long, catching her eye, a silent shared secret passing between them. The guilt that used to haunt his gaze was gone, replaced by a bottomless well of thankfulness. "Does anyone realize what date it is?" Doña Remedios asked, setting her knitting needles aside. Cheeks stuffed with cookies, the kids shook their heads. Adrian glanced at his mother. "It's been exactly 1 year since you came home, son," she murmured. A full year since that sleek black sedan had crept up the hillside. Adrian's eyes drifted toward the driveway. The sports car was still tucked away in the garage, hibernating under a dust cover. He hadn't fired up the engine in months. Instead, he'd picked up a rugged 4x4, something practical enough to haul groceries and get the kids to school safely. "Feels like a lifetime ago, Mom," Adrian mused. "That guy who pulled up in that fancy car, I'm not a fan. He was a miserable soul." "He was just lost," Leo corrected, swiping a crumb off his chin. "But Grandma's prayers helped us find him." Adrian gently set this boy down and rose to his feet. He wandered out into the meadow, stopping at the precise spot where he'd first laid eyes on his family. The grass was lush and knee-high, speckled with those familiar yellow blooms. He sank to his knees, not to beg for a miracle or out of sheer desperation this time. He knelt simply to ground himself, to feel the dirt beneath him and confirm this was all real. Lucia joined him in the grass, followed by the kids, while Doña Remedios leaned on her cane and settled into a chair nearby. Adrian scanned the horizon, the timeless peaks, the endless stretch of blue. His mind drifted to his bank balance, drained significantly by exit fees and the cost of severing ties with his old world. His social standing had evaporated. The invitations to New York charity balls had dried up. His buddies from the country club didn't bother calling anymore. Yet, feeling the warmth of Lucia's shoulder against his own, listening to the steady breathing of his mother and 3 children, Adrian calculated the sum of his existence and realized with mathematical precision he had never been wealthier. "Thank you," he whispered to the breeze. "Who are you thanking, Dad?" Daniel asked. Adrian wrapped one arm around Lucia and scooped the 3 kids into a tight huddle with the other, recreating the embrace that had shielded them during the storm, only now they were bathed in the warm glow of redemption. "I'm thanking my blindness, son," Adrian replied, a peaceful smile spreading across his face. "I'm thanking God I was blind for so long. It took losing my sight to finally understand what it means to truly see." The view pulls back, soaring upward toward the heavens, framing the little family clustered together in the vastness. They remain a tiny speck of warmth and love amidst the cold majesty of the green alpine meadow. The afternoon sun gilds the roof of the house, no longer just a portfolio asset, but finally truly a home. The end.